Welcome everyone to the Western Museum of Flight. I'm Cindy Maka, the director. The barrier that prevented the commercial success of the Concorde was the disruptive effect of the sonic boom along the surface of the Earth. The X-59 will develop technology that will enable commercial aircraft to transport passengers at supersonic speeds without producing surface disruptions over populated areas. To describe to us the technologies that are necessary to accomplish this great achievement, we have NASA test pilots Nils Larson and James Less. Let's welcome these two very special aviation pioneers.
Nils, are you on?
Let me see, am I on? Yeah,
Sounds like you on. Okay, I think we need to stand a little
Stand
closer for the
All
camera.
right, there we go. All right.
Okay, we'll try to do this right. So we're very excited to be here. Roy actually was the one who I think told Cindy, and she invited us, and great thing to do on our Saturday. We didn't have much else going on. Neither of us have been to this museum before. We're definitely going to have to wander around afterwards. I don't know what you have to get back to, but a lot of great airplanes here, and looks like a really good turnout for kind of a gray, dreary Saturday morning. So we're going to talk about what we're doing to prepare to fly the X-59. It is a real airplane. Let's see what's the best way to advance. Here's a picture, a couple different pictures of the aircraft. It is being built as we speak, so this is not just an idea, but it has not yet flown. We are going to talk a little bit about us, how we ended up in these jobs, what we did to get here. We'll talk about the Quesst mission. Nils will probably explain what that is. We'll give a little bit of Sonic Boom 101. We'll talk, what I think you probably all want to hear about is the X-59. We'll talk about the aircraft, what's unique about the design, the progress that we're making building it, and a lot of the technology that goes into it. We'll talk a little bit about what we're doing to train to fly the aircraft. And then there will certainly be time for questions. I think we're probably going to talk for about half the time, and then save your questions, get the mics, and we love taking questions. And we'll stay here as long as that takes. So, right. Nils, you go first.
Nils Larson, obviously NASA test pilot. This is some of the work I have had the privilege of doing at NASA. I've been there for, let's see, my son's 16 and a half, so 16 and a half years. Some of the stuff I got to work, auto GCAS, auto ground collision avoidance with the F-16. That's now saved, I think, 10 airplanes and 12 lives out there. So that's been a really rewarding project to get to work on. Done stuff from the Mars Science Lab to flying DC-8, the ER-2, which is U-2, and then advanced flight controls in the F-15, F-18, and also got to chase Endeavour. If you watched Endeavour when it flew around California, I was in one of the F-18s on the side. Clue was in the F-15 as it went north. My background, that got me to NASA, I grew up in, like all good supersonic test pilots, in West Virginia. My dad and mom were college professors, so I grew up in Bethany, West Virginia, and West Africa. I spent a year in Gambia and a year in Nigeria. My father was teaching in Nigeria and an educational consultant in Gambia with the Peace Corps. In high school, I had a really great instructor that was my physics instructor, my homeroom teacher, and he handed me a book one day, and the book was The Right Stuff, and he said, "You need to read this." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Just read it." And I read it, and I said, "I want to do this. This sounds really cool. So I can be an engineer and a pilot. How cool would that be?" So that set me on my way, and I had to figure out how to go get somebody to pay for that. So I joined the Air Force, and I went to the Air Force Academy, flew gliders at the Air Force Academy, graduated from there, went to pilot training. They brought me back to be a tweet instructor, went off to fly U-2s, then went to the test pilot school, the Air Force test pilot school. What do you do with a guy that flew tweets and U-2s? Because not a whole lot of those really in the Air Force. So because I fit nowhere, that meant I fit everywhere. Ended up flying F-15s, an airplane no one's ever heard of. You can see there below me in the F-15 called the RU-38. It flunked flight test. And the T-38C. And then went off to teach at Navy Test Pilot School. Came back to be the U-2 flight test and depot commander in Palmdale, and then finished my career in the Air Force as the Deputy Ops Group Commander, and then went down the street to NASA.
Okay. So all of us have fairly similar paths, but there'll be a few differences. Nils actually hired me about 13 years ago to fly for NASA. Done a lot of the same things over that period of time. You see a picture there of the shuttle delivery. My photographer in the back got the best picture of the day over the Golden Gate Bridge of the shuttle. We were flying an F-15, and then they came down the coast and then hit the LA area where Nils picked them up, and they hit all the big landmarks. We've chased a variety of things. You can see a picture there. I guess we have no way of pointing. Some parachute tests for capsules, the Orion space capsule. We chased a lot of the parachute tests, and we're right there in position to get pictures of those. I flew the Sophia aircraft. That's a 747 with a telescope in back that Craig's going to talk to you about in a few months. The picture with the auroras there is from the cockpit of that. We did a big breathing test a few years ago to try to learn more about the problems that our military pilots have been having with hypoxia in the cockpit. And we flew a whole bunch of instrumented missions where we just measured everything we did breathing-wise and helped the physiologists learn a lot more about that. My background, a little bit different. In high school, I liked math and science, had never been in an airplane, went off to college, still had never been in an airplane, but I had signed up for Air Force ROTC to pay for my college. I went to Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, a school up in the Northeast, and along the way, the guys at the Air Force convinced me, man, maybe you should be a pilot and get to fly these things instead of just designing them. So out of pilot training, I flew F-111s. After that, when they retired that airplane, I flew the F-117. That was eventually retired. Went off to Air Force Test Pilot School. Like Nils, what are they going to put him in? They put me in the F-16, which was a great experience. I got to do all kinds of testing in that airplane. Towards the end of my Air Force career, flew a business jet over Afghanistan. That's a long story for another time. And then finished up in the same job that he had a couple years prior as a Deputy Ops Group Commander, and then got hired over to NASA. So we'll move on a little bit, and Nils will tell you why we're doing this.
Well,
why are we building the X-59?
I got to tell you I'll do the Roy Martin thing.
Okay.
One of the best.
We don't have that much time.
Yeah, that's true. We don't. But one of the best parts when you're the chief pilot or deputy chief pilot is when you get to make that phone call and tell somebody they got the job. Let HR tell the people that didn't get the job, but when you get to call it up, and I can remember calling him up to tell him he got the job, and I think I said something like, "I can hear you smiling through the phone." So yeah. And then his boss called me and said, "I can't believe you're stealing them from me," and I said, "Hey, want the best." So you heard a little bit about the vision for supersonic flight in the intro, and essentially, right now we can't go supersonic over land because of the noise that it creates. So we have a speed limit based on noise, and ultimately we're saying, why don't we have a noise limit based on noise? Because the work that like Roy did earlier and others, we're pretty sure we can shape that boom so that it's a thump. So, this would actually open up whole new markets, because now you can get places, 2, maybe 3 times as fast as we do now. So that's kind of the whole idea behind why we're doing this thrust. So essentially, we're trying to turn a boom into a thump. The pictures you see here are some of the Schlieren pictures that we've done over the years. Some of those are in the wind tunnel, but that top one you see is actually in the air, and that's 2 T-38s and the actual shocks and their interaction. So the program that we have is actually called Quesst. So X-59 is the aircraft that is being built to be able to do the Quests mission when it comes down to it. So the airplane will have the design that will eventually be able to go get us the data, and once we have the data, then we take that to the regulators to say, this is what we think is an acceptable level of thump, you know, that if you can do this, go out and build this for all the supersonic biz jets and airliners.
And so the Quests mission is to ultimately show that we can make quiet supersonic aircraft. The first part of that is to build an airplane, the X-59. We hesitate to give schedules, but we hope next year, sometime in 2024, to have the first flight of that aircraft. It's being built by Lockheed Martin Skunk Works up in Palmdale, and the Lockheed pilot will get the first flight. Nils and I will cycle in shortly thereafter. It will take about 9 months of initial flight testing to basically show that it is safe to operate, meets the requirements, and all the systems work as planned, and we can fly to the full envelope that is required. After that, we will go into what we call phase 2. There will actually be another slide on that, where we'll measure some of the characteristics of the airplane. Some of those Schlieren photos to see the shock waves. We actually have microphones on the ground measuring how loud it is, probing it with another airplane up close to measure the shock waves. And then what we're really going for is community response testing, approximately 2026, out flying around the country over selected communities and gauging the public response to this sonic thump. We're being told never to say sonic boom again, right? It's a sonic thump.
I guess. Yeah.
Okay, and then all this data is going to go to regulators, hopefully in 2027, and then we can get the FAA to change the rules and allow supersonic flight over land. This depicts the 3 phases, cleverly called phase 1, 2, and 3. The aircraft development, all the acoustic validation. We've done a lot of tests just developing the techniques and the instruments that we need. We're going to put an array of microphones out in the desert, 30 miles long, remotely activated and triggered to capture these sonic booms, sonic thumps as they go past. And then the community response. So you might wonder, how are we going to make a supersonic airplane quieter? Nils is going to explain that for you.
Yeah, so when you have the aircraft and it has all these different shock waves that come off it, as that kind of moves, those shock waves moves through the atmosphere, they kind of come together a little bit, like waves on the ocean kind of, you know, reinforce themselves. So as it kind of goes all the way down, one of the things you see is, you know, when it reaches the ground there, you see an N wave. And we call it an N wave because it looks like an N, so it's not real complex there. But what you hear when you hear a sonic boom, you hear a boom boom. Unless it's lightning and you hear the thunder, that's usually just a boom. But in this case, when an airplane produces a sonic boom, you hear the boom boom. So you hear the front shock, and then you hear the tail shock. One of the things that you'll notice, one of the things that gets you that startle is that rise time, you know, for that really loud part that you get at the beginning is really quick. So it's like that firecracker, that crack, you know, that kind of is really unsettling. So one of the things that you can do, let's see, is if you shape the airplane, there's different things you can do for both the nose shock and the tail shock. But one of the big things you're trying to do is keep those shock waves as far apart, because every time there's a little, you know, change on the airplane, there's another shock wave coming off there. So try and keep those as far apart from each other as possible, you know, so that it takes a while for those things to come together, and as they kind of go through the atmosphere, they're kind of breaking up a little bit. So that's why this airplane has a really long nose. So the nose is 38 feet long, so that helps break up that initial shock. So if you notice, the thump that we get there, or the predicted thump that you look at, doesn't look like an N wave. It doesn't have that rapid rise in the beginning over that short amount of time. So that gives you something that sounds a little bit more supposedly like a car door slamming across the street. So this is what we think right about here. This is, you know, some representative noises that you might have out there, what a regular jet is, that kind of idea.
I'm not sure they can read. They're probably a little small. But.
Yeah, but the big thing is somewhere, you know, in between, you know, a little bit more than distant thunder. And less than, you know, somebody like right here if you're clapping really hard next to you.
Or a basketball bounce.
Yeah, I don't know about that one.
I don't know where that comes from.
I don't know where they got that one, but yeah, all right. Yeah. All right, over to you. You're the next.
And the Concorde is there at about 105 decibels, and we're down around 75, we hope.
Yeah.
So a little bit about the design evolution. Nils and I have been fortunate. We started going to meetings about this long before there was even a program to build an airplane. Lockheed Martin, Boeing were both contracted to start working on designs for what might achieve this quiet sonic thump. This isn't even as far back as it goes, but these are some of the designs that eventually worked their way, evolved towards the design we have today, which is what you should see in the lower right. This doesn't even show, I think we're on a timer. It says I'm not talking fast enough. Originally, they were looking, both Boeing and Lockheed were looking at a 2-engine design, and that was going to just produce a much bigger airplane, which was going to be a little more expensive, take longer to develop. So everybody evolved to a single engine. Certainly a follow-on airliner or passenger or business jet would have multi-engines. We've only got one engine because this is just a demonstrator to show the concept works. So single engine design, and it evolved towards what we have today. And the big takeaway for a quiet supersonic airplane is going to be long and skinny. That's really what you have to do. We show some of the features here, and again, I apologize, the writing is probably a little small, at least for the folks in the back to see. But as an X-plane, it's supposed to be a kind of quick and dirty, let's get this technology airborne, let's not develop too many things we don't have to. So we are trying to use as many different components as we can from other airplanes. The landing gear is going to be is from an F-16. The engine is a Super Hornet engine, a GE 414. It's actually been specially modified for our purposes, but it's pretty close to a stock engine. I'm gonna sneak back again. See a lot of extra control surfaces on this airplane. It's got canards up front, as well as a conventional horizontal tail and a small T-tail. Why do we need all those things? A lot of that, well, why do we do anything on this airplane? It's to get that 75 dB shock on the ground when we're on conditions. And the different surfaces allow us to trim the airplane out, get the center of pressure where the scientists say we need it to be so that those shocks don't coalesce on the way to the ground and we get the thump that we're looking at. The plane's almost 100 feet long, wingspan's about 30 feet. We're targeting Mach 1.4 at 55,000 feet.
Yeah, a lot of those T-tails and the canard and all that stuff is actually, I talked about what controls we're using to control the nose shock. A lot of that is to control the tail shock.
Yeah. Yeah, you can even see on the picture there, the engine is shielded by an aft deck so that the back end of the engine is not visible to the ground because there's usually a big strong shock wave that comes off of that.
Then you notice the inlet is on the top of the airplane, not on the bottom of the airplane. So there's a lot of little things there, you know, and keep in mind this is not a prototype. You know, this is an X-plane to demonstrate the technologies.
One thing you'll see, which we'll talk about a little more later, with this very long nose, there's no way to have a practical canopy or forward windscreen that the pilots can see out. So we can see out the sides just fine, and we've got cameras out front that are going to be on a TV display, and that is what we're going to use to see where we're going and, most importantly, land the plane at the end of the flight. Nils.
Over the years that we've been working on this program, you'll see that obviously a lot of different work done in the wind tunnels to get the aero models, get a lot of the different information that they can use to build the flight controls, performance models, that kind of thing. So a lot of wind tunnel validation to help also validate their computer models. Is this me or you?
You can talk.
All right, I'll talk about that. Once we get into the phase 2, we need to make sure that the techniques that we use to design the airplane really work, that the boom predictions or their thump predictions are actually working, because eventually when we turn it over to the contractors that want to build it, they need to know that if I follow this stuff, I'm going to produce something that is 75 or less PLDB, you know, when it comes to that. So, so during this phase, Clue kind of talked about it. There's a lot of things that we'll look at when it comes to probing the microphones on the ground and basically validating those models. And basically the same thing I just talked about. All right, we'll do the next slide.
One of the things that makes this possible, you maybe heard Roy talk about a project they did with the F5 years ago where they shaped the nose of it. But what really brings the whole design together and makes it possible is modern computer technology that allows them to simulate what it's going to sound like, or well, first of all, the aerodynamics, where the shock waves are going to be, how they're going to propagate through the ground. So it's really advances in computers, I think, that is making this possible now. And this slide's kind of speaking to that and showing a lot of the computer models that have been made. But then once we get the airplane flying, it's making the sonic thump that we expected. Now we've got to go out and find out what is going to be acceptable to the public on the ground. The flying public, yeah, they want to get where they're going twice as fast, but everywhere you go, supersonic, there is a shockwave, pattern of shockwaves hitting the ground. Not everybody understands, most of this audience probably does, but wherever you go, there's a shockwave. It's not just when you go through the sound barrier that you make a boom, it's everywhere you go. And you don't want to live under that route between New York and LA where you have sonic booms, conventional sonic booms hitting you all day, every day. People are not going to be happy about that. And hence the rules with the FAA that we're trying to change. So we are going to go out, we've got scientists looking at different climate regions, different geography, different population densities, and that's what this map here kind of shows. The colors are different areas that we're trying to hit. We're going to go on 4 to 5 different test campaigns where for about a month we're going to fly 2 to 3 sorties a day, flying over different communities on the ground and getting response from the folks. We're going to have iPhone apps out there that will push to volunteers, and basically they'll hear something and they'll get on their phone and tell us what they think. Or we may send them a text and say, hey, did you hear that? It'd be great if they didn't.
And this is one of the really big, unique things with this X-plane. Normally an X-plane lives at Edwards or Pax River. It doesn't go out into the wild out there among, you know, the public. So that drives certain requirements of this airplane when it came to some of its design and some of its capabilities, because we're taking this X-plane out into the normal aerospace system out there into the NAS.
Yeah. Can I talk about that?
Oh, sure.
Another picture.
Yeah, so here's a 3-view drawing that kind of gives you an idea of the airplane as you look at it there. Big, long, skinny airplane. Like we said, about 30 feet wide, 100 feet long. Not real high off the ground, much like an F-16, and when you see that. And like we said, nose is 38 feet long. If you notice the nose gear, I don't know why we'd call it that, because it's nowhere near the nose.
Closer to the back end.
Yeah, I don't know if we want to call it a butt gear, but it's probably not really that popular. You can also see that it doesn't take much before we're going to scrape the stab back there. So, we can't aero brake this thing. There's no tail hook for it. There's no parachute for it. It's got Block 25 landing gear and brakes from an F-16, which means we need long runways when we're playing with this thing.
Okay, so again, it is a real airplane. These are actually old pictures from Lockheed's production floor up in Palmdale. You can see the airplane start to take shape there. They've actually demonstrated a lot of very advanced computer-controlled techniques for building the airplane. I think a lot of this gets glossed over. It's all computer-controlled. They mill the parts, they drill the holes, and they put it together, and everything basically fits, which is pretty awesome. A lot of it is composites. A lot of the wings and the basic airframe is aluminum like everything else, but a lot of the skins are composites. Most of that nose is composite. Here you see nose is on, starting to take shape. The engine is in, a specially built GE 414 for us. There's guys running wires through. It is a very complex airplane. Unlike a lot of X-planes where they slap a bunch of components together to go prove something as quickly as possible, as Nils said, we've got to be able to go out and fly this around the country safely under different weather conditions, with other airplanes around, over populated areas, not just over the desert at Edwards. So it's almost like a production airplane, yet it's an experimental X-plane.
One thing you see in that picture is, and all those wires, it was built around the back seat of a T-38. So that, built the size of the airplane. One of the problems, and that was because of the ejection seat, because we didn't have, unlimited dollars to go out and do ejection seat qualifications. Since that drives that, there's not a lot of room, in that fuselage to put stuff. Most of the fuel is in the wing. We call them fuel trays versus fuel tanks because those wings are so thin, relatively speaking. So, this becomes fun when it comes to, for all you engineers that are out there, heat dissipation, all that other kind of fun stuff. The other thing we haven't mentioned is this thing plays up to 60,000 feet. So its envelope goes up to 60 and out to 1.6-ish if we can get there. We'll see.
This was a big day when the engine actually got installed into the airplane, starting to look a little bit more like something that's going to fly. Along the way, our crash test dummy here, Nils, our test pilot.
Yeah. So one of the days that was, you think you were gone because originally you were supposed to do these tests, the Lockheed pilot gets to just do the normal flight suit test. The NASA pilot gets to put the poopy suit on and all the other stuff. So I actually have a poopy suit on under all that, and then do the egress tests and see how fast you can scramble out of the cockpit, because there's a certain spec you have to meet when it comes to that. So, but that was a really cool day to actually strap into the airplane for the first time. We also did a little bit of evaluation besides the egress. Then we had to go back a few months later and do the lighting eval. So that one you can see the avionics system. It's a Proline Fusion Rockwell Collins, normally in a King Air, that's been modified to be able to go in our aircraft. You can also see that upper display. That is the external vision system. So it's our virtual windscreen that sits there.
Did I cut you off on this previous? You want to
No,
talk about
no, I think
no?
yep,
okay.
we're good. Yep. Now it's your turn.
Okay, so yeah, we talked about there's no forward vision. So NASA has been developing an external vision system. This has been developed in-house actually at Langley Research Center, using a 4K camera and an ultra-high-def TV monitor, and this is going to go on top of the airplane. There's kind of a fixed housing up there for it. And that is what we're going to fly around with. We'll be able to see where we're going, see other aircraft, requirement to see and avoid as a pilot. We think it's going to satisfy that. We did do a test a number of years ago with that actual hardware mounted in a King Air, and we went and flew around, and almost side-by-side comparison, pilot looking out the window up front, looking for traffic, and guy in the back staring at the TV screen. We could actually see other airplanes further out with the camera, just because of the image processing and contrast enhancement that the system's able to do. So as long as we don't take a bird on that camera. For landing, okay, so if you can see in the lower right, that's a view of our TV screen. The gray triangle there, that is, I think this may be a simulated picture, but the gray triangle there is where the nose is. So the camera on top can't see down through the nose, so you can't actually see your touchdown point. So for that we need another camera, and this is our backup. But it's really a system that blends the two together. The camera on the bottom that'll show us where we're landing is a production system. We call it the FVS, the forward vision system, and that will extend down on a mechanism out the bottom of the aircraft. And that's only for takeoff and landing. We have to suck that up because that'll get ripped off if we're going above about 250 knots. So it's gear up, camera up, gear down, camera down. There's no flap switch. The flaps are going to do their thing automatically with the gear. But we have to extend that FES camera so we can actually see our touchdown zone. And if the upper camera fails, we're going to land with the lower camera. If the lower camera fails, we're going to land with the upper camera. If they both fail, we're still going to land.
Lindbergh did it. Come on. Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. He was a little slower, but yeah.
So a lot of program managers and engineers very concerned about what are they going to do if the cameras don't work. But we land from the back seat of F-15s and F-18s where you can't see where you're going. You just got to get close, and then you start looking for runway on either side and touch on down. It'll work. Want to talk about?
Sure. I alluded to the fact that this thing's going to fly up to 60,000 feet. The design point is really like 54,000 feet and 1.4 Mach. So a couple things they had to do. One, normally the ejection seats are not, the ejection seat itself might be certified to go higher. But one of the things that's in there is your emergency oxygen, which if you're falling from that much higher, turns out that they did some calculations, said you need a bigger bottle. So they had to go in and design a bigger bottle in a system, and they did a bunch of tests to make sure that that was okay. Other thing that we're doing is you're saying, well, what if you lose pressurization and you're up that high? That can be dangerous. You're wearing a full pressure suit. We are not. They did put me in a full pressure suit and put me in the back of a T-38 and shoehorn me in there to see how bad that would be. And we said, no, this isn't going to work. So essentially what we have is the same thing the F-22 wears. So we're wearing a G suit, but it's a 2.5 G airplane. So it's like business jet kind of, G limit on it. But the pants will actually blow up should they need to if we lose pressurization. We also have a chest garment that we're wearing that also blows up. The regulator will feed us 70 millimeters mercury worth of 100% oxygen, shoving down our throats, and that's why we need the chest garment to make sure we don't rupture our lungs and, squeeze us while all that's happening, while we get down really quickly. So a lot of, unique life support system with this because we're going so high. So this is our sim. Roy's had the chance to come out and play with this one. Essentially, we don't want to put a lot of hours on this airplane. So we'd like to be able to train the future NASA pilots that are going to fly this besides Clue and myself, and even Clue and myself, with this sim. It's really nice. You got the Jeopardy screens all around you, but the handy thing is that people can, stand next to you while you're flying the airplane. We use this sim for avionics work, for development of flight controls, all kinds of different things. One of the really unique things we found during COVID, something good actually came out of this. One of the things that we ended up doing while everybody was mostly locked down, when we would go in and play in the sim, we found that we were using Teams, Zoom, that kind of stuff for people that were at home. Well, originally it was just sound, but we realized, well, wait a minute. We just mount some cameras in here, and because our team is spread throughout the United States, I had people from Langley asking me questions about the flight control system in my ear, and when they could watch me fly the point, and I would make some comment. They said, "Well, what did you really mean? Did you mean this?" Or, so it was really unique that I don't know that we would have thought to use, this whole Zoom Teams thing like we're doing now. I don't know if we hadn't had that, whether we would have thought to use something like that for the sim. Here's another picture of the sim. It is basically the cockpit of the airplane. So it is within a 1/4 inch. It is pretty much all the same hardware. It does not have the actual mission computers, same hardware of the aircraft. So that part is simulated. So our simulation engineers have to go figure out what the airplane is really doing and then make our stuff look like that.
So in addition to training Nils and I to fly the airplane, we're going to need a whole control room of engineers backing us up, and we're able to train them in the actual control room. You see some of these displays. Well, we haven't flown the airplane yet, but we've connected the simulator to the control room, and now they can see exactly what we're doing, not with a camera over our shoulder, but the same types of displays that they will use when we're doing flight tests. Go back. We've said it's a long, skinny airplane. That does give us some engineering challenges. It's a very flexible airframe. There's a lot of vibration modes, aeroelastic modes that we are concerned about. And a lot of our buildup as we start flying the airplane and go to higher altitudes and faster speeds is going to have to do with flutter and aeroelasticity. And we're going to have engineers staring at their screens, making sure that everything's behaving exactly the way it's supposed to. And if it's not, and they see something unusual, they're going to call a knock it off, and we're going to slow back down, and in some cases speed back up, get to the heart of the envelope where everything's good, and then we're probably going to land, and they're going to have to go back to their drawing boards and sort out what's going on and why isn't this airplane matching the predictions. But everything we do for a lot of the initial flights is going to be monitored by engineers, making sure that everything's working correctly. They're also going to monitor all the systems. Nils talked about heat management and fuel transfer and a lot of other things going on. It's a very challenging design to fit everything in and manage all that correctly just to make this work. So we're not just assuming that the fuel is going to transfer or that the environmental control system is going to work. We've got engineers that are going to be looking at every aspect of these systems as we fly and make sure they're working correctly. And now I think we just have a series of more recent photos showing that we really do have an airplane. Here's some final checks this is the production floor where the airplane was built. And then it got rolled out onto the ramp. So it's on its own gear. Here's something that you wouldn't think about. We do have a tow bar that is long enough to attach to the nose and tow the airplane, but it is really long, and we're not going to plan to take that around the country with us when we go fly elsewhere. So there's actually a remote tug similar to what a lot of general aviation aircraft can use, where we'll put the nose gear up on this little remote tug and somebody's going to drive it with a hand controller and move it around. You can see that's what they're doing here. You can see different angles. It's an odd looking airplane depending on what angle you're looking at. There's the nose. Can't really tell how long the nose is when you're looking at it from the front. And that is probably as close to a complete airplane as we've got. When's paint coming? Paint's coming soon.
I think so, yeah. They keep moving it around, yeah. Sometime this next quarter.
Yeah. You've been out to the run stall?
I have not,
No.
actually, yeah.
This is a stall they've got it out in. Lockheed's starting to do systems tests where they're powering up parts of the airplane. It has not yet run under its own power with the engine on. There's a lot of things they have to look at first to make sure basically that it doesn't damage itself. We could overheat things, we could overload circuitry and various parts of the electrical system. So it's a build-up approach, but we are moving towards first flight. And we're really hoping next year to make that happen.
My friends from Australia like to call it the platypus. So, yeah, I'm hoping it doesn't stick.
Yeah. we've got some folks calling it Snoopy, Big Nose. Pinocchio would be another obvious one. But. Okay, so how do we do? We've got time for questions. Got one back there. Oh. Somebody has a hand mic, so if you raise your hand,
either that or we're just going to repeat them, I guess.
Yeah, or we can repeat the question. Go ahead.
What's the flight endurance going to be?
So the flight endurance of the aircraft is probably about a 1.3 at best, maybe a 1.4. This is assuming we go out and we fly a supersonic mission where we're making a couple of supersonic passes over a community. It does not have a lot of gas. We're going to take off and we're going to be monitoring our fuel burn the entire flight, making sure we're on profile, that we can continue what we're doing and still get back with enough reserve.
It's interesting because it was designed around a T-38 backseat. It's got about a T-38 mission duration. Like normally a T-38 was about an hour 15 for its normal mission. And if you were going cross country, you might be able to squeak 2 hours out of it if you were on vapors. So it's probably going to be pretty similar.
I think in the sim we did a 1.8 maybe.
Yeah.
But that would be not supersonic. That'd be just
Right.
cruising, getting across the country. Okay, up front.
Awesome presentation.
So the first question was
The engine.
the engine, and what's so different about the 414 that we have? Well, you know, the two engine airplanes that are normally in EF&G, you know, Hornets, you have a second engine that if the engine decides it has an issue, it says, well, I assume my brother or sister over here is going to take care of it, so I'll just shut myself down. Well, we don't want that. You know, when it comes to ours, if they have an issue, we would like it to give its life for me. So in this case, you know, well, the engine will basically keep going for as long as it can. So they're modified much more like the new Gripen. I think it's the E&F Gripen uses a 414. So a lot of the same mods that they did probably on that airplane, but they can't tell us because of the whole, you know. Yeah. So a lot of those kind of same mods because it's a single engine airplane. So it was modified because of the whole single engine nature.
And the second question was, how's this different from what the company Boom is doing, right?
Oh, yeah.
So Boom is building a supersonic airplane. They're not worried about their sonic boom. They're assuming they've got a market of over land or over water flight that would make it commercially viable. So they are basically trying to do the same thing Concorde did, but they're trying to do it a lot cheaper so that it would be, again, economically viable if they're just limited to over water routes. And we wish them the best of luck. Their demonstrator is getting pretty close to flying, and we're hoping that it does well. But they will have a loud sonic boom, so you won't see them flying New York to LA. Okay, over here.
But on that comment with Boom, there's a lot of other.
So the question,
repeat that
essentially,
question.
yeah. So essentially,
Good
you'll see a
questions.
lot of other companies, you know, trying to get out in front on this thing. A lot of companies looking at, you know, trying to go supersonic, you know, and hypersonic. You know, what is causing this? You know, if I'm getting this right, what is causing this big swell of being able to do this? You know, we're trying to do it as well. You know, I think the big thing is you see a big aerospace boom happening all over. Whether it is, you know, the rockets and New Shepard, you know, New Glenn and SpaceX, and you also see, you know, any number of new rocket companies, you know, that are cropping up when it comes to all of them, you know. The other big thing is, you know, everybody wants to build a flying taxi now and a flying Uber. You know, and we still have regular commercial stuff we're building, and now we have the X-59 that they want to build to look at a, you know, a large, you know, sustainable flight demonstration. I think it's awesome, you know, and all you other, you know, aerospace engineers that are out there. How awesome is this? And we're seeing the same boom. You know, this was all the stuff we were promised in the '60s, frankly, when I was a little kid. You know, was, you know, going to the moon, and it was, you know, supersonic flight, and, you know, the Jetsons and flying taxis. Well, you know, we kind of died out for a little while, but it's back. So, you know, I think it's really great. I think part of it is that there's venture capital that's there, and I think part of it is the excitement that is out there. The excitement that SpaceX actually, you know, the stuff they do is exciting. It's awesome. When you see what we're trying to do, yeah, the same people like Boom and other companies that want to go supersonic will have the issue of the sonic boom, but you know, if we can go get them the data, change the regulation, they can look at how to go, you know, shape their future aircraft, then hopefully they can go, you know, supersonic or even hypersonic over land, depending, you know, there are different techniques you're going to have to use when you start going really, really fast, you know, for getting rid of, you know, that boom. But I think it's interesting that, you know, we've always wanted to go faster. You know, and now I think we're realizing we can, and we can do it right. So I think that's part of it. Is I think, and Klug kind of nailed it early on, and I don't know if you really caught it when he talked about computing power. When it comes to, you know, a lot of these things that we're seeing, whether it's your self-driving car or your airplane or that kind of stuff, and a lot of that is the computing power that's really there. I think that has really, you know, that boom that happened in the 80s, 90s, and on. I think that boom has really started to enable that future that we wanted in the 60s to now kind of catch up and allow us to look at technologies that will allow that to happen. I know, does that sound like a good answer?
That's a great
All right,
answer.
We'll go with that.
I'll
go with that one.
I'll touch just a little bit. She also mentioned hypersonics, and that is a whole nother leap forward. Hypersonics is speeds where aerodynamic heating becomes your major challenge. Think of glowing space shuttles or glowing space capsules, or even a glowing, it may not glow, but you are going to blister the paint off the wings of your aircraft at hypersonic speeds, and you need to really deal with thermal management so that you protect the people inside. And that's the next step. Right now, the military is very interested in hypersonics as a means of delivering weapons quickly, but there's companies that are seeing that this is the beginning of the hypersonic revolution, and maybe out there's going to be airliners or business jets or at least special purpose aircraft that will travel at hypersonic speeds. And if we don't get started now, it's not going to happen. So we get the next one.
You guys are all about Part 9181.
Right. As Roy said, federal law says thou shalt not. So we're trying to change that law so that it says you can if, kind of thing. So, and I think hopefully we'll see that in the future.
Are you petitioning for that now? Because we all know it takes the FAA 25 years to figure it out.
They know that the data is coming.
Yeah, the Cape, we've done lots of different projects over the years. And probably even when Roy was doing his stuff with the SBD, I think the Cape even came out to those things and saw, what could happen. And the Cape is the international organization that looks at the environmental side of stuff for the regulations that, rule over aviation. So they have come out and visited us. They've come down and saw us when we did our practice stuff down in Galveston, Texas with F-18s. So yeah, they're aware of it and they've been involved. So hopefully we've greased the skids.
Is the Supersonic much like the space shuttle when it re-enters and blisters off and burns off panels?
We're not, the question was, is supersonic for us, is it like the shuttle where you got to worry about, thermal heating and, blistering paint and, parts coming off? For our airplane, we're not going quite that fast. Normally, and we're up high, so the air is pretty thin. So for the speeds that we're flying, and that's one of the reasons why we're flying that speed versus driving around a Mach 2. Mach 2, if we were up there that high, we might start having to worry about, heating effects. You're starting to get there, but where we are at Mach 1.4, we really don't have to worry about heating effects at that altitude. If we were down low, yeah, we'd start melting windscreens and that kind of thing. All right. Yes, sir, over there.
Thank you. First of all, excellent presentation.
That's a good question. Is any of the pressure vessel composite? Yeah, I don't think it is. I think it's all aluminum because there's not much of it that's pressurized. Essentially, the cockpit is pressurized and the avionics bay behind us, and there's an avionics bay underneath us as well. But I think those, because I'm trying to picture the airplane, as it sits there, and I'm pretty sure that's still all aluminum.
Yeah,
but
the
a great
nose
question.
is not pressurized.
Yeah, the nose is not pressurized, and that's all composite. But yeah, great question. Yeah, I like the way you're thinking. So.
There's a question over there.
Wow, you are observant. So the question was, where's the APU on this thing? Because it looks pretty small. It doesn't have one. So yeah,
it is pretty small.
Yeah, it is pretty small because it's non-existent. There is no APU. This is like your T-38. Once again, it's half T-38, half F-16, half F-18. So it, just like the T-38, it starts with a huffer. So originally there was a design for an APU, but as time went on, it went out the door. Yeah.
When you think about scaling of an airplane, as you just scale the length of the airplane up, your volume actually increases by the cube of that. So make it a little bit bigger, you get a lot more room to put extra things in like an APU. But we're a single engine airplane, that kind of drives the whole size of it, and it's a tight fit. Everything in there is a tight fit. But a bigger airliner type airplane is going to be a little more practical because they're going to have more room to put those things in.
Way in the back, in the corner. So the question is there going to be any structural and vibrational tests? And yes, there are. They've actually already done GVT, and now we have, and one of the structural coupling tests. There are follow-on structural coupling tests that they'll be doing, I don't know, probably December. I think right now is the rough time period. I think they were planning to do those. But yes, they've already done some of that for that very reason. So. Right here in the capsule.
One of the pictures showed the boom out through.
I'm trying to think. One of the pictures, they were all along the back, but there are wires that do go out to the nose, but you're right. The only thing...
this is the spine.
That's actually the spine. So this, you're at the tail looking to the cockpit.
This is the tail. Oh,
Yeah.
That's what I misunderstood.
Yeah.
It's a weird looking airplane at different
it's-
angles. It's tough to sometimes tell what you're looking at.
I also find it interesting that he's sitting on a no-step sign.
Yeah. So apparently he's not. He
Well,
would
he's-
probably argue that he's not stepping, I guess. Yes, sir. Again. Yep.
Questions about how we're stopping this thing?
Yeah. He said, "What do we have? Spoilers? Do we have thrust reversers? Do we have any?" And it's so it's no, and brakes. That's it. Yeah. So that's all.
Small, as I said, small design. We can't fit a lot of these extra things in that we probably would have liked to have. We are going to be landing our minimum landing speed, basically towards min fuel, is about 143 knots. We suspect. If we take off and come back right around, it's probably closer to 170 for a landing right after takeoff. And we can't aero brake, so the expectation is we're going to roll out, let the airplane slow down as much as it can, and then have a good idea how much runway is remaining. This is something we built into the avionics, actually. It's going to give a readout of how much runway is remaining. We're not sure whether we're going to be able to see the runway remaining markers out the side, so our avionics will tell us, and we're going to just have to get on the brakes. And we may pre-position ground crew with big fans at the end of the runway to cool the brakes after a normal landing.
Not an issue at Edwards, but other places, yeah, it could be an issue.
What landing length there?
Well, right now, the landing length that we're looking for the is at least 10,000. I think we would prefer 12,000, but right now, we're saying 10,000. And in the sim, that looks good, but we haven't flown the airplane yet, so we're hoping eventually, once we see it, can we do something different? Oshkosh keeps asking, hey, you going to come in there? And I'm like, give me an extra 1,500 feet on your runway, maybe. But, I said, we will probably try and find a way to do it. We'd have to do some special workups to, possibly go in there, but, we'll see.
How about the maroon shirtbacks in there?
How long is the battery power?
Oh, man, you
If
guys
the
are planned.
if the engine quits,
Yeah.
okay.
So his question was, how long is the battery power? Which is a great question because it's not long.
It's about 15 minutes.
It's spec'd for 20. We're hoping to get it 15. So, we're hoping we'll get more, but we'll see. They haven't done the ground test yet for the battery, but it is the issue because if the motor quits or the generator dies, it is a total fly-by-wire airplane, so we got to get it on the deck. And the way we train for it is, if it's supposed to be 20, we got to be on the deck in 15. Because we even need battery power for the brakes. So if we land and then lose electricity, we would still have to eject.
So one of the things we've already been training for in the sim and trying to work out is the profile that we'd follow. If we're at 55,000 feet going Mach 1.4, that's kind of the worst case. How do we slow down, get down, and land all within about 15 minutes? Yep. And you can't just point the nose down because we'll overspeed the airplane. We actually we will probably climb initially, which is why we're going to check it out to 60,000 feet. We actually pull up to slow down, and then once we've got it slower, we'll get as steep a descent as we can make on it and try to get on the ground before we run out of battery.
Yeah, and I know his next question is going to be, yes, we don't have any speed brakes or any in-flight spoilers or anything like that to get us down. It's just a slick airplane that you can see to get down. It's not real easy. The other thing that you may or may not, depending on whether you guys have flown Supersonic before, is the engines. When you're Supersonic, usually somewhere above 1.2, if you pull it to idle, they don't go to idle. They go to mill power. So they'll sit there and the problem is, you've got to get rid of that energy somehow so that you can get whatever they've designed the lockup to, so that you don't have what we call inlet buzz. So, you need to slow the airplane down. Well, if we need to slow down quickly, one of the things we have to do is we have to go up to go down. So, so you pull the power back and then you climb to get the, speed to roll off till it gets below 1.2, so that now the engine will actually go to idle, which is actually a pretty high idle anyway at that, to turn around and come back down. So it's, getting down is not easy. It's like a U2. Yeah. Let's see.
How about way in the back?
We'll go with him first, yeah. His question was, why 1.4 Mach? Why didn't you pick something higher than 1.4 Mach? Because, essentially airliners, the Concorde went Mach 2, so why not that? The best reason for that is that 1.4 can prove the stuff that you need to prove. So, there are more issues and a lot harder, for the airplane to get to 1.6. We would have had to put another engine on it, which would have driven a lot of the other stuff that Jim had talked about earlier. So the biggest reason is that the techniques that they use for the design to predict the thump, all the other stuff, can be proved, with just going to 1.4. So when I talked to our 100-pound brain guys there at NASA, they said the techniques that they use are that we're playing with this airplane should be good out to about Mach 2, maybe just a little bit more than Mach 2. Once you get more than that, then you're going to have to do some other stuff to get that boom to a thump. So does that answer your question, sure? Okay. All right, we'll go.
All right, a couple things.
So, yes, we've got the bladder. That's all part of forcing oxygen under pressure into our lungs to try to keep us conscious long enough to descend. And if we lost the canopy, we might actually have to climb first to slow down, as Nils said, so that we can descend. Roll coupling was the next question. Very long, skinny airplane. The flight controls are fly-by-wire, so they are not going to allow us to roll very fast.
Yeah. So
it may look like a sleek, futuristic airplane. It's going to fly a lot like a business jet.
Yep.
Is roll coupling the same as inertial coupling?
Roll coupling,
Yeah,
inertial coupling,
yep,
same
yep.
thing, yes.
Yep.
Yeah, you take a long, skinny airplane and try to spin it real fast, and it's going to actually pitch up out of control, and yeah, bad idea. So yeah, we're not going to roll the airplane. We're never going to do an aileron roll on the airplane. We're going to go to about 60 degrees of bank, and that's probably as far as it's going to get.
Yes, sir, in the front right here.
So slowing down, basically, you're putting the plane like this.
So the question is, to slow down, are we pitching it up to kind of make it like an air brake? It's a combination of both, making it, increasing the AOA to make it like an air brake, and just, trading your kinetic energy, for potential energy to get rid of some of that, because you're trying to bring the speed off so that the engine will actually slow down. So it's just like going uphill in your car, trying to get it to slow down. So it's a combination of both.
Yeah. We're going to have an angle of attack limit on the airplane that is fairly low, just because of the shape and the aerodynamics. If we got to too high of an angle of attack, it's going to depart controlled flight.
Yeah,
so.
and the angle of attack that it departs at is really low compared to all the stuff that you see around you.
So those fly-by-wire flight controls are going to hopefully keep us from doing something we're not supposed to.
Yeah.
Okay. Do we need to cut it off, or? One more question, we're being told, and we will stay and take any more questions.
The big thing that the T-tail is a trim device, so essentially you're trying to either load or deload, the tail when it comes to it, depending on, the other thing that we can play with is we can play with the CG. We can actually move, like the SR-71, we can move the CG forward. So there's different techniques that they want to try. We can actually get in and program the ailerons and the tail to change their incidence, and what their, null is, essentially. If we want to see, if we bias the ailerons up half a degree, does that lower the boom a little bit? So There's
Thump.
thump, sorry, thump. So there are different techniques. It's just one of the many things that we're using, more for the science side to be able to look at how that will, change, the load on the tail essentially.
The predictions are all for a very precise set of conditions that the thump on the ground is going to be at the right decibel level. And as Nils said, if any of the control surfaces are deflected differently from what they made the prediction at, you can't guarantee that you're going to get the same decibel level on the ground.
The other thing we had them design was a lot of different autopilot systems. Most of the stuff that we have at NASA that we play with is all the hand-me-downs from, the military. Our F-18s are old, our F-15s are old, and then trying, the best 1960s and 70s technology money can buy. So one of the nice things about this is because we had, a clean sheet was we could ask for certain autopilots. There were many autopilots that I asked for that they just laughed and told me no. But we have, some standard autopilots you see in other things. We have, standard altitude hold. We fly with auto throttle a lot. So auto throttle, even supersonic, and it will go supersonic, subsonic with the auto throttle on, so it'll put the afterburner on and off with the auto throttle. We use gamma control a lot when it comes to stuff, and we can also slave it to the nav system to a degree. There are certain modes that we don't have. We have a heading hold, weird heading holds to where like half a degree, once again for the science side of stuff that they want to be able to do. Because, if you work with these scientists, I love to, talk about Ed Herring. Ed Herring, a lot of times when you're in flight test, you come there and they give you the tolerances. We need you here, to validate the data. When we're working with the scientists, they don't give us a tolerance. So we go fly the point and, we come back and we're all excited because we're flying Mach 1.2, and they give us a line so they can get those cool pictures you see, those Schlieren pictures. And so, in order to do that, you got to be within 50 feet or more or closer of that line. When you're doing Mach 1.2, it's like a Mach 1.2 ILS for you people that fly. So you're like, dear Lord, so it's always a competition between us. And he'll come back and say, 20 feet, beat that, and I'll go 15, beat that, and he'll go 7, and I'll go damn, and you'll turn around and Ed Herring, and he'll go 7 feet, and yeah, exactly. Head goes, well, that's 7 feet off. And you're like, you gotta be kidding me. So one of the things that we wanted were some of these autopilots so that you have repeatability of the data and to get those accuracies that, and a lot of times they really want, but it's just, when we have that old stuff, he's only so good. So he's good, but he can't be perfect every time. So,
Not every time.
Yeah, not every time. Yeah, one more right here in the front, sir.
How much flight time are you going to have between?
The question was on in-air refueling. This airplane, not in-air refuelable. So basically, we're going to land it, and refueling will be interesting because the way the tanks are set up, they actually have to hook up a computer to the aircraft in order to fill the tanks properly. So because of that, it will take a little bit longer. You can't just put the hose to it and be done with it. So it'll be a little more complex in between flights. So once again, it's an X-plane. It's not meant to, do a lot of stuff that, we would like, but we're excited about it, and hopefully someday. How much flight time? Typically for a mission, I think Clue said when he was flying his stuff about 1.3, for a mission. If you're just ferrying the airplane, about a 1.8 hour flight. And typically our mission is 2 supersonic passes. So it's 1 followed by about 20 minutes in between, and then the second one to get up to speed, and then do the supersonic pass, which is a pass on condition for about 50 miles. I think it's what the spec is. And if you have any more questions, don't hesitate to wander up and talk to us one-on-one, but I think they want to cut it off. Otherwise, they're going to run out of film.
We'll explain gamma control.
I guess we don't have film. Yeah.